Hello, my name is Kurt Kaufman, and this is for assignment part two of topic four, discussing the IEP process and the different components in the IEP process. The first of which is the parent and student involvement in the IEP process. This is extremely vital part of the IEP process, as the IEP is put in place for the student to succeed. But if the student doesn't reciprocate or doesn't take advantage of the tools and the things that are provided to them based on the IEP, then it will not be successful, because ultimately they are just tools for the student. The parents, it's important that they're involved because they need to understand their rights that they have in each individual state. Those rights vary and change, but overall arching, they are very, very similar across the nation. It's important that they do know that the IEP is not putting responsibility on the school in a sense that their students will succeed. However, it's a plan or an idea, hence the acronym IDEA, right? It is a plan for the students to hold themselves accountable while getting the tools and the help that they need. But ultimately, it is on the student to succeed with the tools and the help that they are getting from all the teachers and support staff on site. But they are an extremely vital part, because they are a big piece of the communication between school, teachers, administrators, and the students. The second part of this is the referral process. The referral process can happen a couple of different ways. If a student is young and they're coming into the school system, typically the way that it works is a teacher or somebody on site, whether it's a support staff or an administrator, notices something that may allow the student to qualify on various different levels, whether it's an academic reason, a social emotional learning lesson, or a social emotional learning impairment, or a physical impairment. Whatever the case is, that there are various ways for them to be referred to that process. Once they're referred to that process, then they go through testing. This type of testing, if it's an academic thing or an academic learning disability, then they'll be put through testing to kind of determine what exactly their learning disability may be, so that way they can get the proper supports put in place for them. If it's a social emotional learning, there may be a school psychologist or a therapist brought in, or they could be referred to an outside therapist that the school has worked closely with or the district works closely with, so that that way they have a universal standard across the board of what is considered and what is not considered, therefore qualifying them based on whatever it is that the school psychologist or the therapist may find. Lastly, the physical impairment, it could be something from a doctor, it could be something noticeable right away that the school, if the student, for instance, I work at a Title I school, a lot of parents and families and kids don't have medical insurance, they don't have access to medical care as readily as other folks or other students. If it's something to where they can't get in and get seen right away, maybe it is something that the school can identify and talk with the parents right away, and get that process started, so that way maybe the school or the school district has an ability for a parent or a student to go see a doctor at no cost to them, which would be super beneficial. Unfortunately, not every district has that capability. So once that's done, then the second part of that referral process starts to begin, and it kind of goes into our third point, which is the evaluation period. Is once either the testing, from whether it's an academic learning disability, or if it's a social emotional, from the school psychologist or therapist, or even if it's a physical impairment, that evaluation of those test results or the results of whatever it is, the doctor's visit, all encompassing, right? Once those results come in, that's when the evaluation begins, and it kind of narrows the focus of what the IEP is going to be for, where the student needs the most help, where the school can provide, if they can't provide certain things, where, if they need to send the student to another school that has more of those capabilities, or if it's something that the school district or the school can bring on campus for that specific student. Eligibility. So at the conclusion of that evaluation period, the student is going to be found eligible or ineligible, depending on what those test results or the evaluation results are going to be. As a general education teacher, I don't typically see that part of this evaluation process, only because I see kind of the completion of this process, and then moving forward, what it is that I can do to assist the student. As far as eligibility goes, I know specifically for my students that I see in physical education, it could be different. I have students that have learning disabilities that may never affect them in physical education, but we still have to adhere to it. If we ever enter the realm of physical written paper test taking or other things, I have to then provide those specific resources to those students. But the eligibility process is fairly short. It's yes or no. And once the case manager of that specific IEP, once it hits their desk, it's overall they determine whether they were found eligible based on specific requirements that are met into the standard, the moral code, the MCEEs, or the model code of ethics for educators. As well as the professional dispositions of learners. The eligibility is a set standard, and then kind of upon that, right, the IEP case manager will kind of curtail or build that IEP based on those two models. Components of the IEP, you have a team that's consistent of the IEP. Now, in the team, right, it's a smaller team, right? It's typically an administrator, one administrator, a case manager. If the student has a social emotional learning disability, there may be a school psychologist or a therapist also involved. If there's a physical impairment, there might be a doctor or some sort of physical rehab specialist that's put in place to help assist the student on the team. And then you have your general education teachers, as well as any special education teachers along the way. Typically, especially at my school, when a student is on has a case manager, when they're on an IEP, in any special education setting, they typically will have multiple special education teachers. One specifically, though, will have them as their student and their case manager in one of the settings, whether it's a co-taught classroom or in an SSTS class or a specialized student tutoring service class. Those are really important. You in the components of that IEP, so you have the team, right? And then in the components of the team, you have various degrees, right? So you'll have typically the way that it goes through in an IEP meeting, you have your introductions, and then from there, where they qualified, what specific learning disability did they qualify under, whether it's an academic, social, emotional learning, or SEL, or a physical impairment. Once that concludes, then typically the IEP case manager will then kind of defer to the general education teachers to notify parent and student kind of how they're doing in class, where they can see improvement, what their grades look like. In the high school setting, it's a little bit different than maybe particularly in the middle school or the elementary school setting, as grades in middle school and elementary school they're not going to hinder a student from moving forward. Whereas if they are in high school, it is kind of more important, right? They have to maintain their eligibility. They have to maintain their transcripts, right? Their grades, right? They have to earn a specific amount of credits to graduate. That doesn't change. However, different avenues can open up if a student starts to fall behind. We can explore different things for those students if they do start to fall behind. Different options, different help for them. At the conclusion of that, then it's kind of once the general education teachers are done speaking, typically any questions are asked of the parent or the student, and then from there it's kind of regurgitating the same information as far as the student was, if they were found eligible again based on the specific learning disability, or SEL or physical impairment. Then, from there, it's, are there going to be any changes if the student needs to have any new learning focus goals, different goals to achieve throughout this specific cycle or this year versus maybe what was on a previous IEP. And then from there, there's an open discussion, open dialogue between parents and IEP case manager, and specifically, general education teachers. If there are different things that need to be brought up or addressed, then those can be done. And then typically that concludes that part of it, because that is the meat and guts, right, of the IEP. Expectations for ongoing communication between teacher, school, and parent guardian to support the development and achievement of the student. I think this is extremely vital. Again, being in a physical education setting, it's a little different, because a lot of students whether it, even if it's just an academic learning situation, right? Like an academic disability. And I use the examples of like dyslexia or ADHD. Typically, we don't see a big issue with those in physical education, only because physical education really kind of triggers certain dopamine levels in the student, and they typically don't have struggles. There are some things, specifically one instance where I have in my weights class that I do, where we do a written workout log that I have to modify for those students, because not all of them understand what I'm asking, or they can't regurgitate the information that they're thinking in their head onto the piece of paper. And so I have to assist them with that to make sure that I'm fulfilling my part of that IEP and not hindering them by placing the same standard upon them in which other students who don't have learning disabilities. So it's really important that we kind of we pay attention to those things. But communication is huge. I always have a line of communication to parents. I'm also a head football coach, so I'm not afraid of talking to parents. It is something that I actually enjoy, because I think it's important that parents understand the possibilities for their students, and kind of what's going on. It's really easy when a student is in school for 6.5, 7 hours a day. It's really hard for parents to kind of lose track, because they're concentrating on their own things that they have to take care of, putting food on the table, making money, paying bills, that type of stuff. It's really hard when a student isn't being very communicative to them. It's important for us to kind of pick up that slack. And so I do my best to really kind of open up that line of communication between my students and their parents. Discussion of the ethical responsibilities the teacher has to uphold the integrity of the profession as a part of the IEP process. This is super important. No kid wants their friends to know that they're on an IEP. They don't want their friends to know that they're deficient in any way, especially in high school, right? Deficiency means you're an outcast, at least in their eyes. Not in any of our eyes, but in their eyes, that's what they feel. And so it's super important that we leave, I use the analogy of the fence. We leave the fence at the same level for everybody in the view of all the students. So that way they don't see that those students that may need that extra little boost step to get up to that fence, get it. And so it's important that, as my job, it's ethically important that I not only treat every student the exact same, but I hold them to the same fence line. Now, that doesn't mean that I can't provide that booster seat or that booster step for them. And that's something that I have to do in a one-on-one situation, or in a pull-out situation where I may pull a student to a side and say, hey, look, this is the expectation for this specific assignment or this specific exercise, but I understand that you may not be able to do it completely. This is an alternative that you can do, or this is something that you can do to help. Now, is it visual to other students when that whatever it is that I provide that student, is it visual to the other students? Yeah, but it's not blaring, right? It's not blurting it out. It's not putting that student on blast. It's not putting them in an awkward situation. Students may recognize it, may see it, but they're never going to go out and say, well, why does this student get this and I don't? And so it's super important that we do our jobs as teachers ethically in a place where we're not putting students in a situation where they feel uncomfortable, but we're putting the students in a situation that they can succeed. And that's all the IEP is there for. The IEP is there for a student to succeed. Much like I said earlier, kind of going back and circling back to the beginning of this, it's the student's ultimate right or ultimate goal to achieve for themselves. That's what we're trying to do as teachers. The IEP is put in place to help students along the way to get them to that point. Because if we can't get them to that point, then when they hit the real world, especially for us in high school, if they don't understand basic ways to help them deal with their disabilities, they're never going to succeed, or it's going to take them a long time to figure it out. Whereas if we can do our jobs as teachers in high school specifically and really provide them supports and give them different things and different tools to succeed, then I think in the end, ultimately, it's going to help them out not only in school academically, but it's also going to help them out in life. And that brings me to the conclusion of this part 2 video. I understand that it goes a little bit more than 5 minutes, and I apologize for that, but I truly feel though that this process is extremely vital. I myself would have been a special education teacher if I thought I could really handle it to the 100% ability. I know that I can't, and so therefore I really, really, really applaud special education teachers, because it is something that is extremely difficult, and I appreciate everything that they do. Thank you so much, and have a great day.